Okay, shall we get started? All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Juan. I am a climate organizer in Edmonton with Climate Justice Edmonton, also known as the Musqueam. I'm here with Mila, so we're just gonna have a quick conversation for about 40 minutes, and then it'll open up to some questions from people in the audience. Thank you all for joining us. Um, yeah, so this is the climate-induced migration session. Maybe I'll toss it over to Mila for a quick intro, and then can kind of get into things a little bit more.
Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be on this panel of climate-induced migration. I'm Mila Nakeko. I'm Dene Suthlene. I'm from the Tlitliquet First Nations in Dene Day. I currently live in Yellowknife, and I'm a multidisciplinary artist, filmmaker, and I am a land-based Indigenous arts educator. I teach moose high tannings.
Cool. Yeah, and then a little bit more about myself. I am a first-generation immigrant and settler from Colombia. Kind of, have experienced a lot of the economic, I guess, struggles of what forces people to migrate and what pushes people to migrate, particularly from the global south, as a child, obviously. But really, I'm grateful for this conversation and for the John Humphrey Center to host this conversation on kind of like a new-ish realm of the migration discussion and the discussion around what it means to be a refugee. So that's kind of what a lot of today is going to be focused around. So Mila and I are kind of just gonna talk things through. We had a chance to meet this week and had some great conversations. So I'm really excited for today. So I guess maybe to start, I was thinking, talk a little bit about what climate-induced migration means to you. Like, what do you think about when you think about climate-induced migration?
When I think about climate-induced migration, I'm from northern Canada. I'm from the Northwest Territories, and it's pretty remote, and we don't have a big population up here. But before, when I used to think about this term, I would think about places far away. A lot of flooding that happens throughout the monsoon season in India or in other countries, and the rapid change in climate in a lot more southern countries, and I didn't really feel, I really felt secure and safe where I'm from up here in the north, from being having to live through or experience any of these types of huge environmental catastrophes until just recently, with our mega forest fires that we're having up here, the flooding that's been happening every spring for some of our communities, and a lot of displaced people during these times, within our small Indigenous communities up here in the Northwest Territories.
I feel like that really calls to a lot of the new realizations that people are having with regards to the impacts of climate change. We know that the so-called Canadian North is warming almost twice as fast as the rest of the world. And so I think for a lot of people, when they think of climate-induced migration, they think exactly what you brought up, right? The idea that when we think about climate refugees, we think about people in Pacific Islands who are dealing with higher rates of sea level rise, and indeed that's true that those people are unfortunately on a pathway to becoming climate refugees. But what we actually see in addition to that is that climate and the impacts of climate are kind of leading to be a new pressure forcing people to move around, right? And for me, when I think about migration, I think about giving people the right to move, but also the right to stay. And very often, people are given so many opportunities to move, but they're given very little opportunities to stay. So when we look at, for example, countries that are so dependent on remittances, like the Philippines, like Mexico, we've seen these kind of huge influences for migration in the past that are almost exclusively economic or conflict based. But now what we're seeing with the impact of climate change is that in countries that are high vulnerability for climate, like Pacific Islands, like the Philippines, like Thailand, like India, like Mexico and South American countries, um, is that not only are people being forced to move from within their countries, which is actually where the majority of climate-induced migration is currently happening, we're also seeing people who are being forced to leave their homes, right? So, I mean, you kind of spoke exactly to that with the idea of seeing of having to leave your home because of climate emergency, because of extreme weather. Um, and so that for me is kind of a really huge realm, and it's an interesting moment right now, right? Because the COP conference is happening in Dubai, where we're seeing hundreds of climate activists and lobbyists and scientists from around the world gathering. And of course, we have dozens of oil and gas lobbyists and CEOs and Danielle Smith kind of in that place. And so maybe I can get us right to that point where it's like, um, I've kind of seen, for example, extraction as something that forces people to migrate, forces people to be refugees, whether it's right here or in the north or in the global south. So I guess what do you make of like knowing that there's all these oil and gas CEOs and lobbyists at COP, and like what do you hope people on the ground there are doing to resist that?
Um, what I'm seeing that's happening at COP um, is that like we do have a lot of good representation there, like from our indigenous organizations that are like lobbying and advocating for like indigenous people around the world to have to be like a part of the conversation because of a lot of the policies and programs that are being developed to like for like climate is for like more developed nations, and like that helps like their governments and stuff like that. It doesn't like trickle down to the people as you like that are forced to leave or have little um little support to stay. So, and I think that there's like a lot of those types of like policies and like solutions that are being like pushed across like in on a level like on that level.
Yeah, yeah. It's been weird seeing the capture of COP by the oil and gas industry. I mean, they of course love to capture everything they can get
Mhm.
their hands on. Um, and I know that one of the really big policies that was worked on last year and that they were trying to expand on this year was loss and damage, which is almost a covert word for almost reparations. I wish it was reparations for the global south. And it was announced that Canada is pledging $15 million to the global fund. So highly insufficient, obviously. And just thinking about kind of the responses that the country is having to that is horrible. And but it is encouraging to know that there's tons of people from here who are going to actually make as much noise as they can. And I saw a picture yesterday of the Alberta government was doing like a little luncheon at COP like 2 days ago, and like three people showed up. So they're being kind of greeted as the villains that they are for trying to like deny and delay and uh, you know like have as little impact on climate policy as possible. So that's really encouraging to see. I guess like thinking about this kind of loss and damage policy of like just like we know that the global north is is incredibly responsible for what we're seeing right now with climate change. But even within the global north, like there's many communities who have very who haven't really had the opportunity to control much of their destinies when it comes to extraction and development and industrialization. um, and so, we talk about this almost like atmospheric colonization by global north nations, but even within the nations themselves, obviously there is um, that happening, right? Like the disparity is at a global scale, but the disparity is at a local scale. And so I
Mhm.
guess thinking about that, like I was wondering if you would feel comfortable sharing a little bit about um, how are things now in Yellowknife after the big fires?
That was one of the things that I was thinking about coming into this conversation, was like, I have like, I'm here as an individual, like that I like experiencing like being like not being able to come home for like 4 weeks. I'm an artist. I'm like self-employed, so like I had a lot of like, I lost a lot of work during that time. It's like, so I'm still like financially trying to recover from of things, and some same like with other people like in our community. But it's like coming into this conversation, I'm just like, I like to have like to talk about my work and like have solutions or have like suggestions of like where like who's doing like what type of work to whatever. But there was like, we haven't had any like official apologies of like how terribly like the government handled the situation, like the city of Yellowknife or like the GNWT, like government in Northwest Territories. There's been no statement or apologies of like how terribly everything was handled. And I think people are still kind of like mentally trying to like recover. We haven't been able to have a space or a time to like share like our experiences as a community. We haven't like I'm not too sure. The only organization I know in town that has like officially put out any type of like statement or letter with recommendations is the Yellowknife Women's Society. They have a website, and they do a lot of work in our community with a lot of like women and families that are experiencing houselessness. And so they have like a whole paper of like how the people that work in that organization try to care for the people that they work with being displaced in Edmonton or Calgary. There was like vulnerable people in our community that ended up on the streets in the cities. A few lives were lost, and like there's no official apology of like how things were handled. And and there's like, and the infrastructure in the north is so like it's so fragile that like this like we have like one fiber optic line that came up and was like it like the line was cut at some point around a fire in Fort Smith, I think, and like 7 communities didn't have communication, didn't have phone lines, didn't have internet, like for over like 24 hours. And like that's like what the infrastructure of the Northwest Territories is. It was so like, how could like people couldn't buy gas or groceries, they didn't have cash. And like, and also there's all of our remote communities that are flying communities that get all of their supplies and resources and stuff from Yellowknife. And so Yellowknife was completely evacuated. So these towns were like left without any groceries coming in, because the planes come up to Yellowknife and then to all of these different communities in the Northwest Territories and in Nunavut. So it was just like, there's like this whole breakdown of just like the whole system that left like half the north like without basic necessities. Like there was no medical, like if somebody had an accident and like let's okay, like how are they going to get them to like Edmonton, because that's the closest place.
Yeah, and one of the parts that I think really kind of blew up over here was people looking at and maybe this changed, maybe you have a different perspective on it, but people kind of looked at WestJet flights, like the cost of WestJet flights just massively went up. Was that the case for the entire evacuation alert?
Yes, like people like leading up to the evacuation, like that was called on for August 16th, like leading up to that evacuation, people were trying to buy plane tickets, and plane tickets were like thousands of dollars. Like they just jacked the prices up.
Yeah. Oh God. And it was really just like when it comes to exploiting people, there is just such, there's so many opportunities to jump at this. And again, like within the broader kind of conversation of climate induced migration, like that really is kind of this disaster capitalism of, when
Mhm.
people are suffering from disasters, so many opportunities to like profit, right? We know
Yeah.
we saw it during the Katrina hurricane that forced hundreds of families, if not thousands of families, out of New Orleans, to possibly never come back, right? Like that's a huge like case of climate refugees. It was, it's been huge around places around the world where for-profit North American companies will come in to set up their charter schools or their for-profit organizations to just really profit off of people. And that's exactly what we saw, right, in the Northwest
Mhm.
Territories. I'm kind of curious, like, what did you see in the moment? Like, how did people fight back against things like that in the moment, or did they even get the chance to?
In the moment, there was so much confusion, and there was so much like just for example, like friends of mine that have like jobs, they're we're still having to go to offices, but they're like senior people, like their managers had already left Yellowknife,
Yeah.
but they still were like having to go to work and still go to these meetings, but they're just like, okay, the boss had already taken off, and so they're just like I'm sorry. um One of the things that was really like, I was talking about the Yellowknife Women's Society and like how they like were having to care for like vulnerable people in our communities, in two different cities, and like trying to like reach out, like there's still people that haven't come home yet. But like with my experience, I had to drive family members um, that were visiting in Yellowknife, drive them to Calgary to catch their planes that they can go home, because their flight was supposed to leave like on that Friday, but the evacuation was like Wednesday. And so they like I drove like a couple thousand kilometers to drive them to catch a flight, and while in Calgary, so like a lot of our people were evacuated to Calgary, and I was able to locate one of our elders that nobody had heard from for like 24 hours. And they're an elder, they're like have like mobile um issues and hearing, like they don't have like good hearing, and they have to they're like assisted to like move around. And I was able to find them in like a motel close to the airport. There was no restaurant nearby. They like didn't have she didn't have a coffee maker or a kettle in her room, but she was with her granddaughter. And when I saw her, her hands were still shaking, like because she was told to go stand in line to get onto one of the flights, and that line was outside in the smoke, and like had gone down like this one of the streets in Yellowknife for blocks,
Yeah.
with like hundreds of citizens in Yellowknife like waiting outside for like a whole entire day. There was no food or water offered while they were waiting in line. There was no food or water offered when they got into the school to be able to get to the thing. So she was just like, I have mobility issues. I can't wait outside. I'm an elder. And so she took a cab with her and her granddaughter to the other facility. The multiplex was supposed to be like shelter in place, and she just waited there and was just like, you guys need to put me on a flight, like, and they kept telling her she had to go wait in that line. And there was like no food and water at this other facility, and then she got onto the flight, no food or water. So she was like one of my elders, one of my aunties, no food or water for like 20 hours until she got to her hotel, and
Yeah.
like she got water and like a gift card to go to Denny's. And she was just like shaking. She was just like completely disoriented. Um, and then like there wasn't any like funds given to people either, and people had to wait weeks and weeks and weeks to get funds to help pay for things, or else like things are offered. Like she was staying in a motel like near the hotel, but all of like the services and a lot of food pickup and stuff like that was offered at another hotel at another location.
And that was all in Calgary, like when she landed to Calgary.
Yeah.
Yeah. How was so you've kind of spoken a little bit about like the like how horribly handled it was from the Yellowknife side. Did things feel different from the receiving side? Like, did you feel like community in places like Calgary and Edmonton showed up in a way that that you didn't expect them to, or what was that like?
There was a lot of mutual aid, and there was a lot of community that reached out, and I was able to contact a few people that like were getting in touch with care in Calgary. So they have like home visits from like healthcare providers in Calgary, and they were able to get her location to that organization. So they came like a couple hours like after I visited to check up on and to make a note where they were, and like made sure they had all the medication that they needed. And then there was also mutual aid and care offered by other displaced Yellowknife residents and citizens in Calgary that did go and check up on them until they were able to be moved by one of our First Nations, located all the elders, and provided transportation for them all to be moved into one hotel so that they were all together.
Yeah.
Like, and that was a few days after the initial evacuation. So the First Nations communities did like so much work in like the after like the chaos of it, like being able to like provide for their members. And
Yeah. Yeah, I guess for me, like even when I think about solutions, like we're dealing with so much, there's just it is always going to be chaotic, it feels, right? Unless
yeah.
we force systems to like actually be prepared and then we kind of fill the gaps as needed. And so that kind of brings me to a place where I'm thinking about, you know, the work that a lot of climate groups are doing right now, I think, finds itself at a strange contradiction where obviously we want to, fight for stronger climate solutions so that we have less and less events like this, where we have, less and less people being forced to flee, more responses to crises, more opportunities, just like better responses. And there's an interesting link here with kind of the global conversation, because we push for more renewables, we push for better built homes, we push for better air quality, better ventilation in people's homes. And the way that it's currently being responded to, at least it seems to be the case, is that it's just leading to an increase in, for example, the role of the temporary foreign worker, right? So governments that are saying, great, you want us to build renewables, you want us to have better farms, you want us to do this and this and this, instead of hiring our own people to do that, or instead of creating the jobs here to do that, let's bring people from overseas. So making that kind of link between that kind of climate induced migration, and again, that very clear economic nervousness, right? Because as long as the temporary foreign worker program exists, people are going to be brought into the temporary foreign worker program. But at its very core, the temporary foreign worker program is almost human trafficking, right? Like it is bringing people over to exploit them and take their labor. Very, very little rights given in response. And those are people who often too have families who are struggling with the impacts of climate, struggling with the economic impacts. And instead of kind of using it as an opportunity to build rights across the board for every community that's involved, it's really in a way kind of pitting groups against each other. So I guess for me, thinking in that mindset of doing climate advocacy, doing migrants' rights advocacy, and linking it to Indigenous rights, and just like having a society that is more prepared to respond to crises, thinking through, okay, what are the links that our advocacy needs to do? So I guess from your point of view, like what are the links that like climate organizers and people from up north and like migrant communities need to do to kind of prepare ourselves for the coming years of this?
How we need to prepare ourselves.
Or like where do you think like these groups could be working closer together, and what would that look like for you?
Yeah, where we intersect. That for the work that we're doing, it definitely. I don't know for like the work that I do, like some of the things that are being impacted by like climate and stuff like that that I'm doing and I'm trying to figure out like how to have conversations around is and I think this might be like something to help us like uh be able to talk to with our communities, where they are able to like where we're able to have like bigger conversations about like how we are like impacted by all of these things, like our mental health and like our ability to like be on our land, and like those types of things I find are um like are like how all of like climate and displacement and like and all of this kind of stuff is affecting us like on a level that we're not really like I have a hard time articulating like my feelings around like a lot of the things that have happened this summer in August. um, I work with an organization, Dene Nawo, and we do a lot of like land-based indigenous like teachings. And we had a moose hide tanning camp in my home community in Litliquin, and we were only operating for 5 days until we had to shut down because the air quality was so bad that we couldn't risk having our elders and our workers outside and learning about like air quality and the particles that are in the air and like how like we breathe them in and how they have long-term effects on our respiratory systems and like how they could like further damage like people that are like immune compromised. And so there's all these like list of things that we've been learning about like at our hide camp and how we care for our community, but also just like how these impacts of climate are reducing and restricting the use of our land. So I have such a like I've worked for 15 years to be able to like reclaim this knowledge of moose hide tanning, and I've worked so hard to be able to get to a point where I'm able to share that knowledge with my community, my people. But now climate change is coming around, and just like there's just like a whole nother challenge to like overcome and like adapt to continue to like work to continue to do this like healing of like from this like from colonial like policies that have like impacted me and my relationship to my land and my relationship to my community and all these types of things. And now there's this other thing that I have to overcome and find language around to like make it a safe place for my community to continue doing like land-based and like our culture, like living like with the land, like having this relationship with the land. So it's just like having like tools and language and like plans and mechanisms within our organization with Dene Nawo to like be flexible enough to like with our programming and like with our relationships with community, and like we're all have to be like understanding and we all have to be patient, but we also like I would like to have like like language to be able to like collectively talk about this, and also like make space to be able to like grieve for these for all that we've lost, and grieve for like for the land,
Yeah.
for all of our homelands that we're displaced from, for like just the continuous destruction that's happening on our homelands, and being able to talk about those and and like, still like adapt to it and like keep working and moving on. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I find it's so tough thinking about like the things that this is making us lose, because we know that we're already losing quite a lot, and there's a grief for the future as well, right? There's a grief for the fear that it is only getting worse. And even when I think about, this summer, where Edmonton was almost consistently blanketed in smoke, um like I see those weekends that are so valuable as also being stolen, right? Like that's time that's being taken away from spending with your loved ones, spending with your craft, spending with reconnecting. And like the people who are stealing that have names, like, right, like they're the CEOs of these oil and gas companies. They are the premiers who do their work for them, right? They are the prime ministers who give billions of dollars to new pipeline expansion, and then who, bring over migrant workers to care for um like the children of the people who are working on those sites, right? And so, thinking about what a just transition looks like, it's that all the people who were involved within that, who are consistently exploited, and who are bearing the brunt of those impacts, like, deserve to be at the very front of working on that. I'm kind of reminded, and I'm gonna kind of botch the story a little bit, but um before 2010, in before the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver, there was a lot of like solidarity organizing between Indigenous groups and migrant groups in Vancouver, particularly based around like the organization No One Is Illegal, because what the city of Vancouver was doing a bunch of sweeps of like unhoused folks, and bringing in migrant labor to really kind of fill in the gaps of the work that needed to be done. And in addition to that, kind of still was doing raids and like deporting people who were undocumented there, right? And so the work that was done with No One Is Illegal was like really deep allyship and solidarity work, kind of as a coalition of like Indigenous and undocumented workers and migrant workers, really fighting for better. Like, I mean, their big goal was pushing back against the Olympics, which did end up happening, anyways, right? But the magic of what they created was just really phenomenal relationships, and really phenomenal new ways to like move forward as a community of people who are often pitted against each other, right? Like there's so much pitting of like Indigenous people against migrants, and there's a lot of pitting of everyone against Indigenous people and everyone against migrants. But like really transcending um that expectation from the colonial state, um to fight back against that, I think just speaks wonders of what we can achieve when we fight together and when we work together. And so yeah, I guess as we slowly move towards the Q&A, I think we're ready to slowly move to the Q&A. But I'm wondering, like, you're an artist. The work that you do is as an artist. Where do you see the role of art in all of this?
um, I think that the work that I do when I speak about climate change and when that's like incorporated into the work I do is mostly through my work as a moose hide tanner. I have always like loved the like being able to like observe like how the environment is impacting like these animals that we like love and care for, and it's respect so much like on their bodies. So like since beginning reclaiming this knowledge for myself and my community, we like being able to see like what type of insects are on the hide, like the increase of some types of insects, like in like the north, like as the north is warming, there's like more different species of ticks that are coming up in the animals. There's different types of like skin anomalies. I have worked across in different Indigenous communities across like Turtle Island and in Anishinaabe communities around Lake Huron. uh, I came across a moose hide that was like infested with ticks and was had rubbed all the hair off of their shoulders. And as like due to climate change, because the winters are so much warmer, the tick like life cycle has changed, and they do not go into hibernation like they used to. And so like there's all these different types of things that like I'm observing and seeing, and how that's affecting like our animal relatives. And it's so being able to like talk about those things when I'm sharing this knowledge, I think is important, because as reclaiming and connecting back with our land, and doing work on our land, and having that, it's our responsibility to witness what is happening, and to talk about that and to share it. So, and like I always think of high tanning as like a indigenous climate solution, where it's like completely green process. There's no chemicals used when we're doing it in a traditional way. We're showing that this is we are capable of doing this as human beings in our like societies, but also like in our communities and within our families. The material we use is a sustainable way of like gifting or carrying on our culture and our identity. A few years ago, I did work in an Inuit community in Labrador, in Nain. And because of climate change, moose are migrating further and further north. There's a ban on their caribou, which is another project that I'm working on. But there's a ban on their caribou, and so that they're learning new cultural practices by incorporating moose into their traditional diet, which is something that's never happened before. And so they're trying to like build a cultural relationship with the moose that is like coming further north into their communities. And so I went to Nain to teach moose hide tanning, to teach like how we use like the whole animal to make tools and to tan their hides. And so these are how like within my work and my art, that's how I incorporate and talk about climate, and like share my knowledge through my traditional knowledge about how what I see is happening, and like, and from like that as like a climate solution.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. Yeah, and I even think about, a lot of the like the amount of, even just within food systems, right? Like folks up north get a chance to really like push back around so many of the narratives that we hear around food systems. But when we even think about food systems here, where there's a higher rates of agriculture and the work that migrant workers play within that. Sorry, my computer's being funny. The work that migrant workers play within that, it really is just like, if we're going to transform food systems in a just and good way, then there is again a very direct link between the work that workers are being asked to do here, how they're being treated, not just by their employers, but by the governments that are bringing them over, and the direct link between that and what it means to to transform your food systems and to really fight for like more than human beings. And yeah, so a whole different, I guess, pathway to go down. But yeah, thank you for sharing. I guess for me, thinking about the work that folks within the climate sphere do, I mean, it feels different from place to place, right? But there's such a need for high intervention within the climate movement when it comes not only to like international kind of advocacy, right? Like a lot of the time, people who are doing climate work know that the impact is largest on the global south or in the north. And those relationships don't exist, right? Like people know, and they don't have connections to migrant workers groups or migrant advocacy groups, or they don't have connection to people who are like working on the land, right? And so just like really thinking through the opportunity that exists to start building those relationships across kind of different sectors, and like really, 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 really working with the spirit of solidarity, right? Because I think to me it becomes evident that when we win big climate wins, if we do them through the lens of justice, if we do them through the lens of land back, if we do them through the lens of no one is illegal, that everyone deserves a right to have a place that they call home, and people deserve the right to stay where they're from, you know. Like if we fight with those kind of perspectives in mind, then like we can win these much bigger things for everyone, rather than like people winning in their own little silos, right? Which I think oftentimes the climate movement has done quite a lot of. I was thinking maybe we could throw it up to some Q and
Yeah.
A. I don't know who the people. I mean, I know there's people watching, but maybe if people had any questions for either one of us or for both of us, like feel free to just start asking away. I don't know if I can unmute you, but we could probably read your questions out loud as well. And it seems you can either use the chat structure or the Q and A structure. So I guess maybe in the meantime, I'm sure people are typing away. I don't know if you had any questions that you're like, I'm curious about this.
Mm, I don't know. Like I just I'm like still thinking about like everything that we talked about.
Yeah.
There's a lot. Um,
Yeah, I one thing that I think that your story has really sparked in me is um just like how high of a need there is for climate and other like advocacy groups in places like Edmonton to like really step up when when people are forced to flee their homes, and the way and I do find that, you know, it's in moments like that that we see actually the beauty of how great humans can be, even in kind of really horrible moments, where like people really go out of their way to help others and to support people that they've never met before, right? um
mhm,
and even like for example, like, you know, hearing stories of kids who are donating their own toys to children who've lost theirs, right? Like it really is that simple. And like going back to that root of like knowing that we know what justice is,
mhm.
and we shouldn't have to wait till someone to tell us what that is, because I think we to a degree we know what it is. Okay, we do have some questions in the chat. Hassan asks, what are some legislative or policy changes you would like to see implemented or advocated for? Yeah, I don't know if you had any. I know you were saying it's in a moment where you're like not sure what the solutions are, but I don't know if there's any that.
Um, if there was like any legislative or policies to change, like, um, there needs to be a plan in place for every single situation like that could possibly happen, because they're happening and they're going to continue to happen in the north, with the fires that are happening and the flooding and um, the the chain of communication completely broke down for a lot of our communities in the north, and like with the fiber optic line going out, it was really difficult to get like any type of information about what was happening in what communities, and then there was notices for some communities to evacuate, but it was only in like one form of like communication, like on the radio or something like that, and like people didn't get the message. And um like I was just thinking about one of one of my aunties lives in Hay River, and it flooded. I think that was like earlier this was it last year? I think I'm yeah, it was last year. And that she was trying to get her grandkids, and they were all like leaving, and she's also has like mobile issues, and she's like trying to like get to the truck, and she can see the water coming down the street towards her house. And it's just like like the communication is I think something that like needs to be looked at in case of emergencies, like in the Northwest Territories, like all of the Northwest Territories, there needs to be like a backup system to to for us to maintain connection with each other in our small communities. And like there has to be another plan for like if something happens to Yellowknife again, like how are all these smaller remote communities going to be like continue like having their like essential needs being met in these smaller communities. And there's so much. Yeah, that's like a really good question. And like it's and hopefully we just have like a new oops, sorry. Hello.
Oh, I can hear you. No, you're good.
This
Yeah.
just
No, you're good. Yeah.
we just had like a new election, so hopefully that there's more competent people that'll be able to like put to create something for the North.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of the story of like being completely shut off from communications, like just makes me think about um the work that Elon Musk is doing on Starlink right now. But that's a man who's not actually invested in ending the climate crisis. That's a man who's not interested in like helping people or averting crisis.
Mhm.
And people are becoming so reliant on that kind of solution in order to stay communicating with each other. Like the alternative is like workers deserve to own those kinds of resources, right? Like communities deserve to own those kinds of resources. And obviously they're very resource intensive. But like if we're dealing with these kind of unprecedented situations, then it's time to start looking at unprecedented solutions. Um,
Mhm.
and the other thing too is that I feel like oftentimes a lot of evacuation is very dependent on the military, right? Like that, like when we run out of people to help with emergency assistance and evacuations, then the immediate turn is to the military. And um, I mean, we see the direct impact that the military industrial complex has on on creating refugees, as we're seeing in Gaza right now. But we also know that the military industrial complex is one of the largest polluters, right? Like they're one of the largest culprits in this moment. And so, like, instead of relying on the military to be our solution for every little emergency or every big emergency, it's like having existing structures where we're working directly with people within their communities. To do that kind of work, right? Train people to do, that extreme weather response. In the States, they just implemented something called the American Climate Corps, which is like a jobs program for young people to directly be involved in climate solutions. And a huge part of it is emergency response, right? And so there's advocacy do here for a youth climate corps, which would be really similar, just like a massive expansion of green jobs. Part of it is, getting people to work directly within not just preparing our communities for what it looks like to be part of the climate crisis, but also being able to respond to that. And then the other really big legislative change that I would love to see is status for all, right? Like we're talking about people who are being exploited in part because many of them are now responding to or being, um, forced to leave their homes because of the climate, are forced to move to a country that is foreign to them, and then are falling into traps where they're being more and more exploited, either by predatory migration agents or predatory employers or predatory governments, right, or predatory industries. And so, I think a lot of people think about a lot of climate infrastructure as being just good in and of itself, but there's a lot of ways for it to go wrong, whether it's lithium mining or using undocumented workers to build, green infrastructure. There has to be a connection of status for all and regularization of undocumented workers into the kind of work that we're trying to do, right? If we're just building green infrastructure for like people who already have citizenship, for people who overwhelmingly are like settler communities, white communities, and then leaving indigenous communities and migrant communities, many migrants of whom are indigenous somewhere else, right?
Mhm.
Um, just kind of let them be the underbelly of the progress that everyone else gets, then it's not a future that I want to fight for, right? I often think about climate advocacy as, if everything changes but everything stays the same, then it hasn't been for good. And so, yeah, like, um, you know, alternatives to military response to crisis, um, status for all, um, you know, all so much of what you spoke to, I think is a lot of these policy changes that I would like to see implemented, and they might seem really big, but
Yeah.
they're not, right? We know that groups like the Migrant Rights Network, like Migrante, has been doing phenomenal work on regularization for years. We know that people have been fighting the military-industrial complex for years, and it is actually incredibly popular to decrease the size of the military, especially when we're spending, billions of dollars on it, when we could be spending those billions of dollars on our communities instead of destroying others. So I think that, yeah, these seem really big, but I think they're closer than we think. Let's look for other questions. Angelica asked, any thoughts about climate reparations, or climate refugees, and mentioned that climate refugees are not part of the Convention of Refugees recognized. I mean, I would say that they should be, right? Like,
Mhm.
that's one of the big changes that we need to start seeing within those conventions. And people often talk about, like, oh, like, the UN's useless, and I think that in moments like this, it shows how useless it is. But, like, it is nice to have globally agreed on papers that we can at least point to. So I mean, yes, I mean, climate refugees need to start being recognized as a type of refugee. Um, and I am for climate reparations, but I also get nervous that, climate reparations will serve as an alternative to just phasing out fossil fuels, phasing out, what's forcing people to become refugees in the first place. So, I mean, yes to that, but also yes to avoiding as many climate refugees as possible. Um, I don't know about you, Mila.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. What if you said no? Actually, I disagree. Let's have more. Let's have more. Um, I'm just looking at some comments. Oh, thoughts on nuclear as clean energy. Do you want to start that one, or do you want me to start?
Oh, um, when like I think about nuclear energy, I think about like the waste that like these companies and like the government want to bury like on indigenous land, and like all of the toxic, like just like the like that's like on our land, that like that's here still forever. And it's just like, and no, I don't think
Yeah.
that that's a solution.
Yeah. And then, like, the amount of extraction that's happening on indigenous lands as well, right? Like, I know that up north, close to, I mean, Yellowknife sitting on Giant Mine, right? Um, and the amount of radiation poisoning that exists close to indigenous communities up north, from gold extraction and from just general resource extraction, that a lot of these companies are cleaning up for. And I mean, we're gonna have to force them to clean up, right?
Mhm.
And so, as we see with the oil and gas, and like orphan wells here, um, and I mean, I think from my end, like, people within the climate movement, I mean, there's so much division on this, and you have the people who are like so pro nuclear that they don't think you can do anything except nuclear, because the promises of nuclear are huge, right? But, like, for us to get there, would mean like so much investment that we already have solutions for, right? Like, we have solar, and we have, wind, and like, with the amount of resources that it would take to get even one or two operational, um, nuclear plants, um, I think we can already do so much more, let alone, the environmental impacts of what it would mean to mine and store and whatever nuclear. So, yeah, I would say we're very much on the same page. I don't know if people have any other questions. We're coming up on our hour.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, there's some really incredible comments, in this chat as well. Okay. Well, seeing no more questions, I think maybe we can end it a little bit early. Um, are there any, I mean, if people want to stay in touch or people want to kind of see what you're up to, is there any places where you think people should follow your work or any of the work that you're doing up in Yellowknife?
Just my Instagram page. Yeah,
Do you want to share what that is?
it's Mila Nakeko.
Okay, perfect. Um, thanks. And I guess for me, I'll plug a few groups. I'll plug Migrante Alberta. They're doing phenomenal work around migrant rights, undocumented migrant rights. And they're all in a room watching. I just can't see them from here. So hi, Migrante. Um, so yeah, they're doing incredible work, and I'm excited to kind of see the kind of work that's being done here. I'll also plug Climate Justice Edmonton. For now, it's the climate group that I'm working with, or that I organize with here in Edmonton. Um, and I don't actually have their Instagram, so I will say, um, if you see them, follow Aware Alberta. Aware does a lot of similar advocacy and organizing around migrants' rights. Right now, they're running Education for All campaign around undocumented children in Edmonton that are not being allowed to go to school because they're undocumented. And again, these kind of stories go exactly into what it means to be dealing with climate induced migration, because as more and more people are forced to leave their homes, we need to be able to like fight for the systems that are actually going to support them when they get here, right? If that is the case. So really support the work that Aware is doing. And yeah, I think that's it for us. I don't know if you wanted anything, if you had any parting words.
I was just going to say Dene Nawo is the other organization that I work with. Yeah.